Hello everyone, this is William Giles. This session today, part 5 of the study of finances from a biblical standpoint. We are going to conclude, and I want to thank you for hanging in here with me on this subject. I also want to thank you for your comments. Let's get right into it. As we come to a close, I spoke before in the previous lesson how I was attacked. And in that attack, I was threatened. I was threatened with physical harm. I was warned that I could die or in fact get murdered because of some of the things that were being said. I was being accused of being racist. I was attacked by people of whom I just had no idea they were against me in such a way. But like I said, or like what was said, I came to the understanding that we will have certain power structures that are against us as people who are trying their best to live in a world that is just so much against us. And that's all I can really say about it. So much. But we have to look at life from a reality standpoint. And that is one of the things that I do. Try and look at life through a reality standpoint. And then I try my best to make adjustments accordingly to survive. And that's what I do. I don't think I'm doing anything wrong, not in my heart. And I hope I'm encouraging others. If you find yourself in certain situations, you know you can depend on me, just like I hope I can depend on you to get some type of a boost whenever I'm down. So that being said, let's get right into the lesson. I want to turn our attention to the book of Acts chapter 5. And the reason why I'm going here is because something was said against me in times past. In the book of Acts chapter 5 and verse 17 and following, it was used against me in such a way that it's really kind of hard to explain, because I really don't understand the mindset of the person who said this. But if I could just try and sum up what they were saying, as we read Acts 5:17, it reads, "Then the high priest rose up, and all those who were with him, which is a sect of the Sadducees, and they were filled with indignation." Drop down to verse 22. And it reads, "But when the officers came and did not find them in the prison, they returned and reported, saying, Indeed, we found the prison shut securely, and the guards standing outside before the doors. But when we opened them, we found no one inside. Now when the high priest, the captain of the temple, and the chief priests heard these things, they wondered what the outcome would be. So one came and told them, saying, Look, the men whom you put in prison are standing in the temple and teaching the people. The captain went with the officers and brought them without violence, for they feared the people, lest they should be stoned." The reason why I'm reading this is because it was said that I had a misunderstanding of Scripture, and that I was totally wrong about who some of these people are, as far as it say the sect of the Sadducees, verse 17, the officers, verse 22, verse 24, the captain of the temple, the chief priest, and also the same thing mentioned in verse 26. We see here some people are being mentioned. And therefore, in order to try and get ahead of me and discard me, and people basically telling me I don't know what I'm talking about, because if I read this and I thought that these people who are named these certain power structures like the captain and the sect of the Sadducees and so forth, if I read that and thought that they were the Roman police, somehow I'm wrong, and I should just be quiet and I shouldn't comment on anything anymore because I don't even know who these people are. Well, if that person wasn't trying to get in front of me, first thing first, I never would have went to Acts chapter 5 to even try and talk about the people of whom I already knew who they were. So I will agree with this. The sect of the Sadducees, this group of people, this party of people, they are not the Romans. They are not the Gentiles. These were Jews. Yes, they were. But it's something I want to say about them, and I know I'm correct in saying this. You'll have to come to the understanding of how assimilation works when a group of people who are already against you, and especially when you can attach power and force and finances to a certain people that are against you, you are dealing with some people who have been assimilated to the highest degree. So go look up how assimilation takes place on a people once a power structure comes in and take over. And then you'll see why the Sadducees, or this sect of the Sadducees, act in the way they act. And one of the things that happens here is when you try and shut a person up, as opposed to at least first listening to what they have to say, you wouldn't be so quick to call them ignorant or stupid or lack of understanding, because you also have to see who these people were with. Now let's get into that. Why did this sect of the Sadducees act the way they were acting? They did not like Christ. They did not like people representing Christ, which is what the apostles was going through at the time in Acts chapter 5. They were going up against a people who could not stand the New Testament law that came through the Messiah. And so they fought back on every side. And they used tactics much like the governing power at the time to help them wreak havoc on the people. So yes, these people were not the Gentiles. They were not the Romans. Yes, they were Jews, but they were Jews who were totally assimilated, which means they took away their values and took on other power structure values and lived by them. And this is what I mean by that. Here it is. If you would allow me to explain myself first before he tried to shut me up. First thing first, he skipped over Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John to get to the book of Acts to try to shut me up. But if you go through the book of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, starting in Matthew chapter 26. A background before we start reading all of the people who was involved and everything that took place. in these groups of people, as we started off talking about these groups of people, we're going to see the groups of people who were into play when it came to the betrayal of Jesus Christ. When it came to the betrayal of the Messiah, we have to understand everything that was set up, who set it up, why they set it up, and some of the power and the influence that helped to guide these people to do this. And I'll give you a heads up on this. I'll explain how power, force, and finances came into play in the betrayal of our Lord. So here go the background of Matthew 26, verse 3 and 4. And it reads, Then the chief priests and the scribes and the elders of the people assembled at the place of the high priest, who was called Caiaphas, and plotted to take Jesus by trickery and kill him. I'm going to talk to y'all a little bit here in a minute about this word trickery. That word trickery and associated to how the word force can be used in a legal sense. I'll get to that after we read these scriptures. But first, that was Matthew chapter 26, verse 3 and 4. Now, in Mark chapter 14, verse 1. Let's go there real quickly. We are going to start understanding the list of people who had a hand in the betrayal of the Messiah. Christ, who we call him, Yeshua, by his original name. Mark 14, verse 1, it reads, After 2 days, it was the Passover and the feast of unleavened bread, and the chief priests and the scribes sought how they might take him by trickery and put him to death. Now, once again, you're not hearing much of a difference in the people mentioned in Mark chapter 14, verse 1. It's basically saying the same thing in Matthew 26, 3 and 4. Now, let's shoot over to Luke 22, verse 4 and 5, and it reads, So he went his way and conferred with the chief priests and captains. Okay. Now we see here an addition to the group of people. The chief priests and captains, that he might betray him to them. And they were glad and agreed to give him money. Now we see the association of how finances is coming into play. We're going to talk more about that here in just a minute. So that's Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. So that's Matthew 26, 3 and 4. Mark 14, verse 1. Luke 22, verse 4 and 5. Now, let's go to the book of John, chapter 18, verse 3, and then shoot down to verses 12. John 18. John 18, and it reads, verse 3, Then Judas, having received a detachment of troops and officers of the chief priests, and Pharisees, more people added to the group, came there with lanterns, torches, and weapons. Shoot over to verse 12. Then the detachment of troops and the captain and the officers of the Jews arrested Jesus and bound him. So now we see everybody in place. If we read all those scriptures, and let's get an understanding of Matthew 26, 3 and 4, Mark 14, verse 1, Luke 22, 4 and 5, John 18, 3 and 12. This is what's specific about the book of John, and I like the way John wrote this with the help of the Holy Spirit, exposing some things that need to be talked about. Because when we read here, in verse 3 and verse 12 of John 18, it says, Judas, which is another person, another entity in this group being guided by the devil, says, having received a detachment of troops. Now, in all cases, when you read the book, you read the description of who these people are, the detachment of troops. Let's first go, before I tell you who it is, hold your hand at John 18 and shoot real quick to Matthew 20. And let's take a look at who else would be involved when we read Matthew 20 verse 18, and it says, behold, we are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be betrayed to the chief priests and to the scribes, and they will condemn him to death and deliver him to the Gentiles to mock and to scourge and to crucify, and the third day he will rise again. So now we see even the Gentiles have a place in the betrayal of the Messiah. So when we go back to John chapter 18 and we see here the detachment of troops, when you go do your research, you will find that as we understand who these people are, some versions of the Bible will say the detachment of troops. Other versions of the Bible will say the band. Other versions of certain Bibles will be more specific and say the Roman cohort. Cohort spelled C-O-H-O-R-T. And in all cases, we see here that these are the Gentiles. Which in this case, this was the Roman police. Police force, military force. If you look at who was in power at the time and think about the sect of the Sadducees, look at how they were copying the oppressive system at the time to terrorize their own people. I want you to soak that in, because we're going to talk about everybody. When you put those scriptures together, Matthew 26, 3 and 4, Mark 14, verse 1, Luke 22, verse 4, 4 and 5, John 18, 3 and 12. We will see here, it was the chief priests, the elders, the scribes, the Pharisees, the officers of the Jews, and the band. The band would be called either the band, the detachment of troops, or the Roman cohort, which was the Gentiles, which is the Roman police at the time. And Judas. All these people worked together. And as noted in Matthew 26, 3 and 4, and Mark 14, 1, trickery was used, which is a form of force. And I'm going to read to you a definition of force here in just a second. They use this trickery or this force to betray Jesus. Now, real quick, a definition of the use of force. In a legal sense, a while back I was taking a class and we were going over the definition of the word force from a legal sense. And although it's a lot more to this, I'm just reading you what was relevant to what caught my eye. The definition of force is strength or energy brought to bear a cause of motion or change, active power, either moral or mental, violence, compulsion, or constraint exerted upon a person or a thing to do violence by way of compelling by physical, moral, or intellectual means. Now let me say this. First thing first, is no such thing as somebody thinking it's a wise idea to outthink the Most High or His Son, the Christ, or the Holy Spirit. It's not going to happen. Or even the angels. It's just not going to happen. So it definitely took somebody to be in the mindset that only the devil have to even think that they're going to use trickery to do something to the Messiah. Now, you can trick man, but you're not finna trick the Most High. It's not happening. So that definitely tells right there that the devil was involved with all this and all these certain groups of people who would do something so sick as to even want to betray Jesus Christ. But do you see everybody that was involved? Chief priests, elders, scribes, Pharisees, officers of the Jews, and the detachment of troops, and Judas. That's the kind of planning people do in times to try and stay ahead of you, to try and stay on top of you, to exert their force or their power or things to keep you down or us down. If they did it to Jesus, who else you think they'll do it to? I'm using that word "they" very loosely right now. Look at everything stacked up against you. The reason why I'm bringing this up is because I'm going to have to talk to you a little bit about history. Now, let me say this before I get started. This is not a common thing that you mix history with Bible, and I'm not really trying to do it. I'm just looking at life from a reality standpoint. So if you don't want to hear history, this might be, you might not want to hear nothing else I have to say. I'm just trying to be blunt and honest and transparent as possible. But at some point in time, I asked the question. But I'm asking a question that's biblically based. And that question is, why is it like this? Now remember, in Genesis 25, verse 22, a question was asked. Why am I like this? We're basically asking the same question. Why is it like this? Why does so many things happen to where people go covertly amongst themselves and work amongst themselves to do things to show their power, their force, and will back it up financially to just do things wrong to another people? This is a question that I feel is fair to ask. Now I will say this, it's a time and a place for everything. But if you keep going through life and avoiding and disregarding and trying to shut people up when they ask this question at times that I feel is more than right, you can't help but say somebody is doing something and it's against me. So what's against us? The Bible just gave us confirmation of some of the things that's against you. Once again, let me read it. The reason why I want to keep pulling this list of people out is because you got to understand the process of assimilating. When people are against you, some of your own folks will adopt another individual's ways, take on their ways, and forget everything about you. So some people will just straight up forget God's ways and take on the way of a power structure that's in this earth and hold to that more than what's moral. Look at this people again. Chief priests, elders, scribes, Pharisees, officers of the Jews, Judas, and a detachment of troops. All them for one Jesus. I know what you're saying. Brother Will, you supposed to be talking about the study of finances. You talking about people and what they do. I am. Because you got to understand what controls some people. And when we speak specifically about Judas, can I help you to understand the type of person Judas was? Let me help you to understand the type of person this was so we can attach this to finances. In the book of John chapter 12, mark this, John chapter 12. Let's start at verse 3. Then it reads, Then Mary took a pound of very costly oil of spikenard, anointed the feet of Jesus, and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the fragrance of the oil. But one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, who would betray him, said, Why was this fragrant oil not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor? This he said, not that he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief and had the money box, and he used to take what was put in it. Let that sink in. This is Judas. Let this sink in. I'm going to read two versions of the Bible to bring light of something that need to be said. I'm reading the New King James Version. In John chapter 12 verse 6 it says, This he said, not that he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief and had the money box and used to take what was put in it. But if you read the old King James Version, the one that came out in 1611, in John chapter 12 verse 6 it reads, This he said, not that he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief and he had to bag and bear what was put therein. Let me read it one more time. This he said, not that he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief and had to bag and bear what was put therein. When we read this, we first have to understand Judas was a thief. And the only way to be a thief, you have to steal you have to take something that's not yours. It don't belong to you. So it belonged to somebody else. Let's see who it belonged to. The Bible is saying something that I don't know if you guys heard this before, but I'm going to reiterate it. If you heard it before, I'll reiterate it. But I'm going to say this, and I'm not inaccurate when I say this. I'm saying something that's true. All you got to do is read the scriptures and see who this money belonged to. Somebody. The money belonged to Jesus. So basically it's like this. Jesus had so much money he couldn't even carry all of it. It was just that heavy. Because if you look in the old King James Version of the Bible, it says he had to bag and bear what was put therein. That word bear, if you read it in context, that word bear means burdensome or heavy or hard to deal with, hard to carry in this case. Jesus had literally so much money that he made somebody else carry all the money he had. And it was so much that the man who was carrying it was stealing it. And it was still hard to carry it even after he was stealing it. Now, ain't no way to really tell how much money he had, because we know money at the time was gold and silver. But it was so much. He had a hard time carrying it. And if you think about how much walking Jesus did, that man did some carrying. Which helps me to say this. I've heard in times, and I really believe that this was not that accurate of a statement. I can understand the reason behind it was said, behind why people would say this, but I've heard people say in times that Jesus was a poor man. And I have reason to believe after I read this, that's not necessarily true. I would say he acted poor, which has its benefits. Oh, trust me, we can take this as a lesson from the Most High and from Jesus Christ. With the Holy Spirit guiding us and helping us to understand this, acting poor but being rich is a definite benefit. Because I'm going to tell you this. I'm broke. I don't really have a lot of money. I try and work with what I got. But if I was rich, I would say this. Bentley is not on my mind. A mansion is not on my mind. It's just not. It's not time for Cadillac if I was to make it financially. And if you really think about it, in today's economy, even $1 million is really still not a lot of money. Got to be careful with what you got. One way is to be thankful and to be appreciative and still learn how to live life on a budget. But that's another subject for another day. You can leave comments about this and try and encourage people, that are having financial troubles and things of that nature. But all I'm going to say is this. Actually being rich but acting poor is something that is of great benefit. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because you got to understand, when I made the study of finances, and as I'm bringing out these group of people, some people are guided by money and power and the force that they can use upon somebody else just because they can get away with it. And that's not fair. And I'm a person, I like to live life in a reality standpoint. So sometimes I read these scriptures and then I look at life and I try and figure out, why is this like this? Something is going on. So when I put together a subject called the study of finances, I wasn't trying to take something and put it in the Bible where it wasn't there. It was here. And like everything it said before, we put nothing above the Most High. In heaven, we put nothing above Him. Although there's some very important things going on down here on this earth, we put nothing above the Most High in heaven. We always honor Him. We always try our best to give Him glory. But the tools that we have down here on this earth, if we can utilize them to make life better, I'm always going to encourage you to do that. But you got to understand some things that's lined up against you. So when somebody tell me something like, you will always have two governments against you, this is not what I said. This is what somebody else said. When somebody says something like, you always have two governments lined up against you, one going to be in the world in a secular sense, and the other one going to be in the church. To say you against me, do you know what that does as a person that been trusting and listening to folk that you just get hit all of a sudden and realize they don't really even care about you in some cases. Y'all, that hurt. But the more I read these scriptures, the more I understand why I have to depend and trust on the Most High in everything that comes to me in this life. And I hope you take this lesson from how I failed at some things in life. And I hope you don't fail. So let's get to it. Enough talking. I got to talk to you a little bit about history. I gave nothing but book, chapter, and verse all this time to help us understand there's some things about power and money and force and trickery and all these different things that people use against you to try and control you, backstab you, betray you, and Lord knows what else. Now let's look at something real quick. I heard from a man who did a study a while back. His name was Ray Hagins. Now, when I talk about people, although some of them may be somewhat spiritual or whatever way you look at them, I'm going to say this. I don't always look at everybody as spiritual leaders. But if you say something that's true and correct, I believe you. I go look it up to see if what you're saying is true. And he said something that was true. And I could not take this away from him. This man's name is Ray Hagins. And he said there are certain types of oppression. I talked about oppression before in some previous lessons. But certain types of oppression has a way of getting to you and doing you a certain way. He said it's oppression, suppression, and repression. He caught my attention when he said that. When he said oppression. What I do to you. That's oppression. To keep you down. What I do to you. Suppression. What I do to you, but I keep it perpetual. So it's ongoing. Then he said, now repression. What I do to you, I do it so long, so much, and so good to the point that now I don't even have to do it anymore. You do it for me. Now that's oppression to the fullest right there. Go back in Psalms and read about that. God will take vengeance on those who are oppressed. Because oppression is just that tyrannical. Where it can take on to a bloodline. It can go so far as to get into your DNA. And scientists have proven this. And the only way you can understand what I'm talking about, not only from a biblical sense, I'm going to have to talk to you a little bit about what happened to us here on this earth. Not only in the biblical sense, but in a spiritual sense. Some things just happened. The only way to start fixing up, you got to identify where you at. Do something about it. Even if you're not successful, do something to try and at least start building up the confidence to get out of some of these problems. What are some of these problems? I want to first, I got so much I could talk to you about. I'll be here for another hour, and I'm not going to do that. But I'm going to try my best to quickly read through some things that most of us know about. But I want to reiterate them. I'm going to talk to us a little bit about something I read in this book. This book is entitled To Tell the Truth Freely, a book that my wife and I was reading. And the book is written by a lady by the name of Maya Bay. And in this book, it says the life of Ida B. Wells. In the 8th section of her book, she talks about a massacre that happened in 1919. Now look at this timeline. In 1919, in a place called Elaine, Arkansas. Let's read a little bit of her book, where it reads, a wave of renewed racial violence against black sharecroppers in the Arkansas Delta in the fall of 1919 attracted little official investigation. Ida B. Wells was drawn back to the fray. The pitched battles that took place in Elaine, Arkansas pitted black sharecroppers against local whites and federal troops, brought to a quarrel the race war. The conflict and its casualties remain hazy to this day. State officials and local papers covered up the activities of the military and white civilians, describing the Elaine riot as a Negro uprising. Now I want y'all to understand something. They're calling this a Negro uprising. Gee, why are you calling it a Negro uprising? Let's see what they call a Negro uprising. Let's see if this is fair. And by the way, this is continuing when somebody say they make a title to their lesson and try and prove that it's a righteous function in all governments of the world. Let's just see if this is righteous. Let's just see if this is righteous. In Elaine, another group of whites fired on a meeting of Union members and their families at the Hook Spur Church. When the black men guarding the meeting fired back, killing one man, the shootout became a Negro uprising. That's what a Negro uprising is, like when you do something tyrannical to a group of people, and then when they push back, they the one uprising. Yeah, right. I don't even understand. Let me keep reading. That don't even make no sense. Let's keep reading. I'm sorry. I hate to stop like that, but some of this stuff, it'll make you mad. Let's go on. Thousands of armed whites descended on Elaine. Among them were 536 troops dispatched by Governor Charles H. Brough of Arkansas. He ordered to disarm both blacks and whites and shoot blacks who refused to surrender their weapons. The troops seemed to have joined forces with the white vigilantes, armed with military weaponry that included 7 machine guns. Arkansas whites overpowered and outnumbered the Phillips County blacks who chose to defend themselves. Now watch this. All told, 5 whites died in Elaine, alongside an unrecorded number of blacks, later estimated by Walter White at 200. But by the Arkansas Gazette reporter, whose name is Louis Dunaway, reported 856. Both estimates suggested nothing short of a massacre, as does the eyewitnesses' testimony from the riot. One white teacher later reported having seen 28 black people killed and their bodies thrown into a pit and burned. First thing first, why would you even want to witness that? Like, shouldn't it be gruesome enough to watch one person executed? You gonna sit there and watch 28 and then watch them get burnt and you sit there and count? Really? I'm going to keep reading. As well as the bodies of 16 African American men strung up on a bridge outside of Helena. 2 days after the shooting, other Elaine residents noted the stench of dead bodies could be smelled for 2 miles. However, the black corpses remain unreported and unacknowledged by the local presses. Righteous functions, huh? That was 1919. Fast forward, 1921. Before I go to 1921, the Elaine, Arkansas massacre, what happened basically was this. The question was asked, why is this like this? They basically asked the question when they were going to get paid correctly for the work they had done. Now that prompted what some people may call righteous functions. Talk about assimilation to the fullest. That prompted a group of people to think it was alright to terrorize them for asking a question. A fair question. When we gonna get paid, basically, for our hard work. That was Elaine, Arkansas. Fast forward, 1921. Tulsa, Oklahoma. All the information is out there. There's really no point in me talking about it. But you know and I know that young man didn't do nothing to that young lady in that elevator. But just like Elaine, Arkansas, you just want some power structures in the world. Just don't want a people to live at their potential. And sat there and did all that to all those people in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Didn't pay them the insurance. All the murder, the burning of the houses, the looting of the businesses. Murder on a scale that they still can't count how many people died. Whole generations of people wiped off the face of the earth. Righteous functions in all governments of the world. If you really want to go look, who owned them planes? Yeah, you figure it out. I ain't gonna tell you, because it seems like when I say stuff, people get mad at me and want to tell me shut up. I don't know what I'm talking about. Fast forward. 1923. Rosewood, Florida. You know and I know that man didn't do nothing. First of all, they didn't even identify who the man was. If you look at the story of why they decided to go do this massacre, the excuse is it was a, you figure out what was said. And so while you're going to figure out what was said about who that wasn't true, once again, just like Elaine, Arkansas, just like Tulsa, Oklahoma, they was just looking for a reason to not let a people have nothing. Now, underhand, I don't have a lot of proof of this, but I somewhat remember, according to some history and some movies, that it was really a group of World War I soldiers, a group of black men that was getting ready to go buy up all that cropland out there. And they had the money, but the people didn't want them to have it. So I believe what happened was, it was a level of, once before they gave the black men the opportunity to get up and do something for themselves and start their own business, have their own cropland, have their own money, have their own land, have their own houses and all that, which they already had in that area, they said, we'll kill them before we let them have anything. This is not sounding so righteous to me. And think about all the people that were affected during this process. What about the reparations that's owed specifically to the people whom were either the descendants of the folks who were killed, and how a whole portion of Florida was probably supposed to be completely owned by a group of people that rightly worked for it? You see the things that are done, just like we read in the Bible, and we see this group of people that will backstab and use their power and use finances and use force to do wrong to another people, and they get totally away with it. At least they might get away with it on earth. I don't know about them getting away with it on Judgment Day. It's not wise to do that. Let's read a little bit more. Go do the research. Don't sit up here and take my word for it. Go do the research on some of the things I'm about to tell you. My goodness. I'm finna read something once again. A man by the name of Ray Higgins put out some information and said, go look it up. If you think I'm lying, this happened. I got a document that I'm about to read that came out in 1945. I'm not going to read all of it. I'm just going to read part of page 2 and part of page 3 of this document that will show you how bad it is. This document is called Urbanizing America, Goals and Problems. I'll say this again. Urbanizing America, the Goals and Problems. In this document on page 2 it reads, the need for controls. Our studies show the relationship of man to the city is the need for enforced laws to replace tribe custom. Laws and law enforcement agencies are presently in cities all over the world, but at times they find it difficult to cope with problems among them and need help. An aid to law and order that has not been good in the fullest extent possible is the power of public custom opinion in the ethnic enclaves. Cooperating preachers, politicians, teachers, etc. These enclaves perform many useful purposes. One of the most important is that the enclaves act as a lifetime reception area in which the second generation can learn to make the transition to the sink life, or the ghetto life, or the jungle life. Now I want y'all to go get this document and go look it up and read who actually made this document, because it sure didn't come from me, especially being in 1945 it was made. Who think like this? Why would they want to do this? Now that's the end of page 2. Let's go on to page 3 and get down to the nitty gritty of some things, of everything lined up against us. I'm telling you, if they did it to Jesus, who else you think they did it to? Watch this. On page 3, it says, our most critical needs at this time, therefore, is for ideas, principles, and designing spaces that will maintain a healthy density. A healthy interaction rate, a proper amount of involvement, museums, jobs, games, swimming pools, movies, etc., and a continuing sense of ethnic identification. The creation of such ideas and principles will require the combined effort of many diverse specialists working all secretly, closely together on a massive scale. Let me say this again. The creation of such ideas and principles will require the combined effort of many diverse specialists, all working secretly, closely together on a massive scale. The coterie of experts will be city planners, architects, engineers of all types, economists, law enforcement specialists, traffic specialists, educators, lawyers, social workers, political scientists, psychologists, anthropologists, ethologists, and preachers. Y'all starting to catch something yet? See, if that man knew when he said what he said about multiple governments against you in this world, multiple governing entities against you in this world. He just mentioned two. And what hurt is I sat there and I funded my own tyranny in some cases for a government to be against me. I'm sorry, a governing system to be against me. And I volunteered my own and paid for my own tyranny. Let me read this again. I did not say this. The creation of such ideas and principles will require a combined effort of many diverse specialists, all working together secretly, closely together on a massive scale. The coterie of experts will be city planners, architects, engineers of all types, economists, law enforcement specialists, traffic specialists, educators, lawyers, social workers, political scientists, psychologists, anthropologists, ethologists, and preachers. An ethologist, go look up what an ethologist is. ETHOLOGISTS. Ethologist. And when I see that ethologist, I couldn't help but try and figure out why is an ethologist necessary to try and control the people. Now you're going to have to do your own research to try and figure out who are these people they trying to control. Let me direct your attention, and as you can see here, it's going to be a study called the Rat Park. This study was done in the 1970s to the early 1980s. But if you look at the study that was done in 1945, Urbanizing America, Goals and Problems, you also see where the ethologists kicked in about the 1970s to do a study called the Rat Park. Go look it up. Don't take my word for it. Go look it up. The Rat Park was a series of studies into drug addiction, which was conducted in the 1970s in the early 70s and all the way through to the early 1980s, more specifically 1981. If I could just be real quick, because it's a lot to read, but from what I exerted out of the text that I found, they basically took rats and set them up in boxes, in cages, and they use substandard living conditions, and they use water and substandard food, and experimented with drugs on rats. I didn't do this, y'all. They did all that with some rats and then turn around and thought of human beings. Now I want you do the research. You look at the timeline. Marcus Garvey, the 1930s, they exiled him. Late 1930s, early 1940s, redlining, a financial hit to you figure out who the financial hit was to. 1945, urbanizing America, goals and problems. Go back a little bit. 1919, before that, 1919, Elaine, Arkansas. 1921, Tulsa, Oklahoma. 1923, Rosewood, Florida. Then Marcus Garvey. Then redlining. Then urbanizing America. A study that passed all this time, all the way up to the early 70s and mid 70s, early 80s, where it was somebody thought to use rats. Study on rats with drugs. And then turn around, me being an 80s baby, I remember how drugs hit real hard, more specifically crack. See, when I was growing up, I remember growing up in the hood where it was people we called the big homies and the OGs and the big brothers in the neighborhood that used to play football with us and teach us how to throw and be quarterbacks and be running backs and tailbacks and wide receivers and offensive linemen and defensive linemen. It's like these OGs where we grew up, these guys really looked out for us. And I remember them being there, then all of a sudden they wasn't there. I remember when crack hit my household, and I'm saying my household, the house I was in, and it took my stepfather. But I'll say this, I will admit this, we should have never allowed that stuff to come into our neighborhoods. While I'm on this note, let me say this, big up to this generation. I thank God for this generation of young, black, strong men and women who have made their mind up, because we know the systems that's designed against us. You know and I know, just like crack, it's some things that's designed to hit you. So when crack hit us, we went to jail or hell. That's all we got, jail or hell. You got caught with it, I'm talking about, if I remember correctly, minimum 20-year sentences. Or was it 40? It was something. We should have never dealt with that. So when I think about how it was other systems within the drug systems, I know it was designed to hit us. But we said no. And we won. But what's sad is, and it was not fair, when we had crack, we went to jail. We didn't get a slap on the wrist and a trip to the hospital, some counseling, and then they let us go. No, they ain't do us like that. We went to jail, or we was dying in the streets over something. And I'm saying we, that generation at the time, was dying in the streets over something that totally tore us up or helped to tear us up. So I want to say this to the young generation. Stay strong. Just stay strong. And give yourself a pat on the back. And give yourself a hug. And stay strong. because we can pull ourselves out of a problem that the world that tries its best to put us in. Because you know and I know, ain't no way possible. We don't have no ships. We don't have no shipping containers. We don't have none of that stuff to bring that stuff over here. But somehow it made its way over here. Stay strong. Say no. Don't let that stuff come in your household. Don't let that stuff tear up your family. You be strong for your family. What was I at? Oh yeah. Be strong. But you see here the timeline of how everything was just one hit after another, after another, after another. Yep. I got one more thing to say. As I come to a close, I'm finna get back to the Bible. I got one more thing to say. As it pertains to history. And I want y'all to go look it up. There was a certain project known as MK Naomi. I want you to go look up and see what happened there. It's called Project MK Naomi, Naomi. Look up how long this project took and how for a long time, you know and I know, some things were just not right. And somebody got to pay for that. As I come to a close, the first thing I know somebody saying, he ain't doing nothing but talking about a whole bunch of history. He ain't doing nothing but causing problems in division. He's doing this, he's doing that. He need to just shut up. Don't nobody need to listen to him. I can't wait for somebody to say that so I can drop this on you. Just in case you didn't think. See, I got a brain to think with. And there's nothing, I ain't gonna say there's nothing wrong. If you find there's something wrong with me, don't listen. But if you know I'm saying something that's true, you know I'm saying something that's true. All you got to do is look around you. Something happened. And it could have been better, but somebody put something in place to keep it worse. And it gets worse, and it gets worse, and it gets worse. And proof that it keeps getting worse and worse and worse, back to the document, Urbanizing America. On page 2, it says, these enclaves perform many useful purposes. One of the most important is that the enclave acts as lifetime reception area in which the second generation can learn to make the transition to the sink or the jungle or the ghetto life. Which means they wanted a perpetual system of making sure the next generation stay right where they want them to be. And you wonder why I made a statement a while back in one of my classes, and I said certain living conditions is living in a box. I was not talking about an actual physical box that you live in. I was talking about a box on your mind. A box on your finances. A box on your love life. A box on your experiences. A box in your religion. A box on your thinking. A box on your progression. Excuse me if I'm raising my voice. My goodness, there's so much I can talk to you about. It's so much I can talk to you about. But I don't want to waste too much of your time. As we come to a close, if they would have just let me speak, I would have explained all this. But that box is so relevant to what the world wants to put you through. And all you got to do is do the research. And if you don't want to hear history, you could have turned me off. But you know and I know something ain't right. And you know you don't want to be all the way honest. Let me hear you up. I'm finna get back to the Bible. But right before I get back to the Bible, I want to read this one last thing from Maya Bay's book. Well, even in 1917, did y'all know it was a riot that happened in Houston in 1917? Where 100 black soldiers took up arms against local whites because of the harassment at the hands of the Houston police. On August 27, 1917, where when all of the black soldiers involved received court-martials and 13 were sentenced to death in a hasty military trial without appeal. Let me read something to you that Ida B. Wells went through. And I'm reading from her book. She says, But Ida B. Wells, who saw the soldiers as martyrs, refused to be silenced, and the army had executed the leaders of the Houston riot. She believed to placate Southern hatred. According to Ida, she encouraged the NFL to hold a memorial service for the men whose lives had been taken, and in that way utter a solemn protest. This plan failed when Ida could find no black church willing to host the event. So Ida settled for distributing buttons that she had ordered for the service. The buttons were inscribed with the words, Memorial, Martyred Negro Soldiers. Now I want to take note of this. And I really got to hear you up. That she could not find any what's considered black church. And let me do a little exegesis of this. There's no such thing as black church. But I kind of got an understanding of what she's saying. She's saying you would think that if anybody would stand up for what's right and what's true, it will be people of your own skin color who know and understand and feel where you're coming from. But she went through, a woman was standing up for men, and men couldn't even stand up for men. The book says, a plan that failed when Ida could find no black church willing to host the event to help with the Solomon protest. Okay. Once again, Will, you ain't doing nothing but talking a whole bunch of history. You ain't doing nothing but causing division. You just need to be quiet. Okay. Well, check this out. Let me go ahead and give you Bible so y'all know I'm not going to say I am very. I'm going to say I'm looking at life through a reality standpoint. And I know that history is backing up what this Bible is saying. And all we got to do in this case, to prove all that history right, and to show you somebody owe. And if you're not going to help us, then could you at least let us be so that we can do something to help get us out the problems that the world put us in? Which is why I said make a plan. Do something. Well, what can you do? Something. Even with a little, do something. And in the book of James chapter 5 it reads, come now you rich. Now you figure out who this is talking about. I'm not going to even explain it. I'm going to just read it and I'm about to stop. Come now you rich. Reap and howl for your miseries that are coming upon you. Your riches are corrupted and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver are corroded, and their corrosion will be the witness against you, and will eat your flesh like fire. You have heaped up treasure in the last days. Indeed, the wages of the laborers who mowed your fields, which you kept back by fraud, cry out, and the cries of the reapers have reached the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth, who lived on the earth in treasure. You have lived on the earth in pleasure and luxury. You have fattened your hearts as in the day of slaughter. You have condemned, you have murdered the just. He does not resist you. This, as I go to read verse 7, let me say this. This is why I put my faith and my trust in the Most High, because the Bible is reading in verse 7 something as a requirement for those that are on this earth today. What is one of those requirements? Let's read. Verse 7, it reads, Therefore be patient, brethren, until the coming of the Lord. See how the farmer waits for the precious fruit of the earth, waiting patiently for it until it receive the early and latter rain. You also be patient. Establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is at hand. Two things. Verse 7, patience and waiting. And if you read in context, I want to say this. That do not mean sit down and do nothing. The farmer, you can't be a farmer if you wasn't out there planting seeds and watering. And also another thing a farmer do is cultivate the land. This requires work. So I'm not going to tell nobody just sit up and just wait and do nothing. And I'm not going to tell you something like just sit there and wait and hope for the best. No. You got to put in some work. And that word wait actually means put in the work. Just like a waiter for your table. They sit there and they put in the work to see to it that the things of the table are met. Wait patiently. Which means when it's time to move, move. Like I say, it's a time and a place for everything. And while you at it, establish your heart, for the coming of the Lord is at hand. Which means this. But when you establish your heart in the Most High, you don't have nothing to worry about. You're going to be alright. You're going to be alright. Let's go ahead and close out. Just a quick recap. The Bible talks about how a good man in his house leaves an inheritance to his children's children. Supported by the book of Proverbs, chapter 13, verse 22. The Bible also talks about a good man and some of the qualifications of a good man. And that was supported by the book of Psalms, or the 112th division. And so as we take those scriptures and read them and digest them and see some things we can do to help us while we're on this earth, understand that this is now a New Testament scripture, and that is the book of 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 6. And it reads, Now godliness with contentment is great gain. And as you do your research on contentment, we have an understanding now godliness with contentment is great gain. Godliness, try your best to live as righteous as possible. Seek help if you need help to get your life right, and through the saving grace that's in the Most High, in the Lord Jesus Christ. But that contentment, as you do your research, you'll see simple satisfaction can help you a long ways in this earth. And I hope you have been blessed. I hope I've helped. I hope I've explained myself, and I did it the best I could. If there's anything you can implement to this lesson, please do so. Please be an encouragement to others. I always hope the best for you. I love you. I care for you. Want the best for you. Stay in God's strong and unchanging hands. Stay blessed.